This series is going to cover extensive modal interchange chordally, creating chord situations with modal interchange, not soloing over a drone. And changing scales, that seems to be the most common things that the guitar players like to do on channels. So you could create chord situations where it would be very, very, very difficult to solo over because you have to become hyper aware of what chord is underneath you. And you can't really rely on a drone to save you every time you switch scales. This is also because when I first started YouTubing, it was very, very poorly structured. And I wanted to cover this topic, and it was actually requested a little while ago. So I'm going to start covering it gradually, how to build up an extensive chordal ability to switch in between modes. And this can have a very powerful effect on your music, like the opening sequence I stuck in on purpose. You don't have to do that kind of music, but it made it sound very powerful and dramatic. So borrowing chords from other modes is very powerful. We're not talking about this droning over a bunch of different scales. Now, since I'm not a native keyboard player, it's hard for me to just kind of riff out over this drone like I can on guitar, for instance. But I could think of a whole ton of scales that'll work over this. Now, that's not what we're doing. We're going to approach modal interchange from a chordal perspective, like this. And this gives us a very harmonically rich situation. So this is something the people who want to get into film scores might want to pay attention to. They might do something in Dorian. This is very James Newton Howardish to do. Do something in Aeolian, and then do something maybe in Phrygian, and then the harmonic minor. That way you could get to a 5 chord. He might do something like this. This is very common in film scores. Going to the natural minor 6, the Dorian 4, Phrygian, now the 5 of harmonic minor, and the 4. Well, that's how I was thinking anyway, is through borrowing from those specific scales. So we're going to cover all that kind of stuff in this. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do some memorization exercises. People are like, man, no. We're going to do a little boring exercise, I know, but this actually will help you big time. Starting with parallel minor is a great place to start. It's a form of modal interchange. They used to call it borrowing in the old school terms, but it's still a form of modal interchange. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keep the regular 1 and make the rest the borrowed parallel minor chords. And we're going to see later that, a lot of these chords are very common to specific modes, so you'll already have them memorized. That's why we're doing this. So we're going to put in the regular 1. Okay. Now to C minor. Now we're going to put in the minor 4. The major flat 7, which would be B flat. The major flat 3, which would be E flat. The major flat 6, which would be A flat. And then the diminished 2. And the minor 5. And let's put in a 1 just to finish it off with a regular raised third. So I'm just going to put in some reminder accidentals here. I always encourage people to write things out. My students who actually do this process of writing things out are have become very, very good harmonic analyzers of music, historic music and modern music. So it's something you should consider if you don't read music. I am going to go back to the keyboard view here in a second. I'm going to put in the Roman numerals. But here's the sequence we get. It's almost like a Picardy third minor. You're going to notice something here though. When we stick in the chords, let's go ahead and stick in the chords. And I'm going to just talk as I do this because we're going to go back to the keyboard in a second. So I'm going to tell you in advance, like this F minor here is related to C Phrygian dominant, okay? The B flat could be related to many modes related to C. Same with the E flat. That's why we're doing this process. A flat. And we'll talk about that stuff later, but the minor 5 here, the G minor, could be C mixolydian. So this is why we're doing this exercise. We're memorizing these chords that have a relationship to C, a borrowed or modally interchanged relationship, chordal. This exercise is actually very good to do. And you'll notice something here. This is actually just 1, 4, minor version, flat 7, flat 3, 6, flat 6, 2, diminished. Got to borrow this little diminished symbol here. 5, 1. This works out really well because it's a very circle of fifth kind of root movement. Counterclockwise, which usually almost always works out. So you'll notice this particular order of chords works out perfectly. We're going to still deal with some boringness because we're just going to move this to D flat and repeat the process. You might want to write it out as well. I encourage that. Now, I don't care how you voice it as long as you know what chords you're using. You want this to become second nature. And then just keep moving up chromatically. And I'm sitting here doing this exercise to show how important it is to do these tedious little exercises with basic triads. You're laying a foundation. And for me personally, I never want to be somebody who's always stuck with a favorite key. I like to make sure all of them have equality. And there's lots of reasons for that because, for one, you could transpose any particular piece of music to a different key very quickly, for instance, even if you're not a keyboard player. I'm thinking of the next part of the sequence. Also, it opens a lot of doors for harmonic wandering, for instance, modulation, all that stuff. And these little tedious exercises also take a lot of the guesswork out of stuff. Eliminating guesswork actually helps put you into kind of like a state of flow to where you're doing less thinking about what you need to switch to and more creating. That's another reason to do stuff like this. And you don't have to do it like a master keyboard player. I don't claim to be any master keyboard player. My main instrument is guitar. Well, it's the instrument I grew up on, but I rarely play anymore, to be honest. I actually do a lot of notation work mostly. And I'm talking through this procedure because I want to demonstrate that, this should be that easy for you to actually do this. That's the point you want to get to with any kind of harmonic movement, where it starts to become super easy to not even think about it. Again, not as a keyboard player, just memorizing what chords are doing what. It doesn't matter if you're a keyboard player or not. You could do it much slower than I'm doing it, and that's okay. You're not sitting here trying to be a great keyboard. So there's only 3 more to go. So you're almost done. I'm looking at the time. This exercise did only take you about 5 or 6 minutes to do once you have it thoroughly memorized and practice it. So there we go. So you already have a borrowed chord progression right here. You could also use the borrowed chords from the parallel minor as for pivots to different keys. Going to C. Now using the same concept to E flat. And there's another reason to go through this tedious little exercise is you could rapidly modulate a tritone away. Remember, you could always make chords more complicated later, like between the 1 and the 4. You always want to lay the foundation with basic chords before you start getting more complex, like and this is still just using chords from parallel minor. But you want to lay the foundation. What we're going to find is that if you memorize the chords from parallel minor, you're going to find it's going to cover a lot of related modes, like Mixolydian, for instance. The B flat's in Mixolydian, so is the G minor. If we consider the C the root, the F minor could be the 4 chord of C Phrygian dominant if we can consider C the root. So different modes that have the same root are going to have a lot of similar common chords that you're going to find. That's why we're doing exercises like this.